They teach you to pause, to assess, to document, to protect yourself first. Policy before instinct. But none of that mattered when the man hit the tile floor. It was past midnight at Eastwood Memorial. The kind of night where the cold gnaws at bone and the coffee's gone bitter in the pot. I was reviewing discharge notes when the glass doors burst open hard enough that the hinges buckled. He stumbled in like a shadow, hunched, soaked in red from ribs to thighs. "Please," he said. Just that. Then he dropped. Blood pooled fast, painting the grout. His breath came in wet gasps, shallow and sharp. Every nurse behind the triage desk froze, eyes wide, hands hovering near clipboards. He had no ID. No name on the board. No intake form. Technically, he wasn't ours yet. But I was already moving. Gloves snapped on. "Gurney!" I shouted, sliding across the tile to reach him. "Get me vitals now." The others hesitated. Triage protocol says you can't treat without intake. But he was bleeding out in front of us. I didn't care about protocol. Not then. He was light bones and cold sweat. I tilted his head, checked airway, saw the jagged wound across his side pulsing crimson. Stab wound. Deep. Arterial maybe. I heard someone say call security. Another voice muttered, "We can't admit him, we're full." I didn't stop to argue. Because I'd made my promise long ago. The next time someone needed care before paperwork, I'd choose the patient. Every time. So I did. Push the trauma doors, I ordered. He's hemorrhaging. Nobody moved fast enough. So I moved faster. People ask why I stayed in Eastwood. I graduated top of my class. Offers came in from Louisville, Lexington, even out west. Higher pay, better staffing ratios, stable hours. But none of those places knew what it was like to lose someone because the nearest hospital was 40 miles and a prayer away. I grew up here. My dad worked the coal seams until the mines closed and his lungs gave out. My mother made meals stretch with government cheese and army precision. She was a cook in the Gulf, didn't talk much about it, but every Sunday she folded her apron like a flag. I learned what care looked like from watching her serve without asking for thanks. Eastwood had one ER. Underfunded, overused. Staff turned over like weather. Patients stacked like cordwood on winter nights. But this was my town. My people. I applied the day I passed my boards. Told the HR manager I didn't want rotation, I wanted trauma. She laughed. Said I'd burn out in 6 months. That was 4 years ago. I'd been written up twice since. Once for stitching a homeless man in triage before intake. He was bleeding from the scalp, confused. I had 2 options, treat him or log him. I chose to treat. Second time it was a teenage girl, overdosed and brought in by her brother. She didn't have insurance. The attending told me to wait for site clearance. I started Narcan before her pulse dropped. Both times I heard the same phrase, "This isn't how we do it." But no one could explain why not. There were nights I questioned it. Nights I watched old women turned away because they missed an appointment. Nights we intubated drunk men with missing teeth while security hovered nearby like mercy needed surveillance. But I stayed. Because the quiet part of me, the stubborn daughter of a miner and a soldier, refused to let paperwork be the reason someone died. John Raymond didn't walk in that night with a resume. He came in folded over his own ribs, trailing blood and dirt and something deeper, a resignation I recognized. I didn't know his name yet. But I knew that look. He was already used to being ignored. Already expecting us to freeze. I broke protocol because I knew what the alternative looked like. I wheeled him into trauma with one hand holding pressure and the other guiding the bed. The on-call physician, Dr. Harlan, stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed. "He needs paperwork," he said flatly. "He needs a clamp and oneg blood," I shot back. He didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Only Jacob, our overnight orderly, rolled forward. He was quiet, middle-aged, ex-army. Never said much, but he was always there when things got hard. He passed me a suture tray. Vitals. Crashing. Pressure 60 over nothing. Jacob stepped beside the bed. "You want the retractor?" I nodded. On it. I'd only been in 2 code reds before where I ran the whole room. This made 3. I found the source, an arterial tear low in the abdomen, maybe from a long blade or fractured bone. I packed it, clamped, called for transfusion. Still no one moved. The director entered, then Ms. Griggs. Starch collar, clipboard in hand. "What is this?" "Emergency," I said, not looking up. "Who authorized intake?" He collapsed. "We didn't have time. I'm seeing no ID. No clearance to treat. You've breached protocol. He's dying." That isn't the point. It's exactly the point. Jacob didn't flinch. He pressed gauze against the wound, eyes locked on vitals. This man served, he said quietly. I know him. Griggs paused. What? John Raymond. Iraq. 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry. Saved 3 of our guys in Al-Qaim. Took a hit to the chest. Lost his commission fighting for benefits after. I stopped. Looked down. This gaunt man nearly lifeless, he'd once carried men through enemy fire. Are you sure? I asked. I watched him do it. Griggs stepped back, caught between policy and truth. But it was too late. We were already past the line. John made it through the night. Barely. The clamp held, but he needed surgery. Blood loss was severe. His core temperature dropped to dangerous levels. We kept him warm with heat packs and warmed saline. The on-call surgeon arrived around 2:40 a.m., groggy but capable. We prepped quickly, and by sunrise, John Raymond was in post-op with a pulse in the low 80s. I stayed with him. Sat in the corner of the recovery room in bloodied scrubs, hands too tired to tremble. My chart was still open, half-filled. Technically, he was still unregistered. I didn't care. But Griggs did. By 7 a.m., I was called into her office. She didn't yell. Griggs never yelled. She delivered reprimands the way insurance companies deny claims, quietly, clinically, and with a smile that felt like it had teeth. You violated Protocol 6.14, she began, as well as Intake Regulation 8C regarding treatment without clearance. He was dying. I understand that, Nurse Hart. But this is not a battlefield hospital. We have a chain of command, liability, budget constraints. You're aware we've exceeded our charity case allowance for the quarter. That last word echoed charity. He's not a case, I said. He's a veteran. Without identification. Without insurance. Without anyone to vouch for him. Until Mr. Coyle decided to. Jacob didn't decide. He remembered. She held up a file thin as air. This is your 3rd violation. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I'm placing you on administrative suspension pending internal review. My badge felt like it weighed 5 pounds when I unpinned it. I walked out without a word. Word spread fast. By lunchtime, half the ER knew. Some said I'd overstepped. Others whispered thanks. A few avoided me completely, afraid that alignment might mean paperwork of their own. John remained unconscious. His vitals stabilized, but he didn't wake. The attending team debated placing him under psych hold if no one came forward. He still had no ID, no address, no emergency contact. Just a long scar beneath his ribs and a silence that stretched too far. Security checked local shelters. Nothing. One nurse suggested turning him over to county services for transfer to a long-term care facility. Someone else joked about billing the VA. That's how it always starts. First they strip your name, then your file, then your story. I sat on the steps of the hospital as the sun dipped low. Red dust curled under tires in the lot. Ambulances came and went, lights flashing on people whose names would matter until the forms were signed. That's when I heard the engines. Low at first, then louder. Rumbling like thunder off the ridge. Motorcycles. Not just one or two. A convoy. They pulled in slow and sure, chrome and matte black, flags stitched to saddlebags, patches faded with time. Veterans. At least 20 of them. A few dismounted fast. Others took their time. One man, tall and dark-skinned with a limp, came toward me first. He wore a leather vest with Eastwood Guard embroidered on the back. You Lily Hart? I am. He nodded. We heard what you did. I'm suspended. He grinned. Not by us. Another man stepped forward. Broad shoulders, clean shirt, councilman pin on his vest. He raised his voice just enough. Media's on the way, he said. We're not letting this slide. By the time Griggs emerged from the building, 2 local journalists were already filming. Veterans lined the sidewalk, not shouting, just standing. Present. One held up a photo. John Raymond, younger in uniform, smile worn thin by desert sun. Beside him stood Jacob, arm around his shoulder. He saved me, Jacob said quietly. I didn't forget. Griggs faltered. She scanned the crowd, the cameras, the faces. This wasn't policy now. This was pressure. That night John woke. His first words, "Did anyone get my gear?" I smiled. "You made it." He looked at me unfocused. "You were there." I was. He tried to sit up. Failed. "They told me to leave," he whispered. "Not anymore." John didn't remember much of the ER. Fragments maybe. The sound of my voice. The light overhead. The tug of stitches through skin. What he did remember came later. In the quiet hours when post-op pain set in and nurses tiptoed by. He asked for water. Then for Jacob. Jacob came immediately. They spoke in code at first, the kind only brothers in arms understand. Talked about Al came about third shifts and busted Humvees and sand that got into everything. I stood outside the door watching. John leaned back into the pillow, eyes wet but unashamed. "Did I make it out this time?" Jacob nodded. "She made sure of it." Inside the hospital, things began to shift. Not because policy changed, but because people had. One of the ICU nurses, Tamara, filed a statement with HR supporting my decision. Said she'd watched from the hallway and had prepared to assist if needed. Another from billing anonymously sent a note, "He deserves better." They all do. The media coverage lit up local news. Headlines read, "Nurse suspended after saving veteran," and "Hero denied, then saved." The councilman who'd ridden in with the veterans? His name was James Carter. He gave a statement at the next city council meeting. Described John's military record, his honors, the broken VA pipeline, the names of the 3 soldiers John pulled out of that ambush and Al came. His voice never rose. But it carried. "We can't claim patriotism on holidays and forget it every other day," he said. "This town will stand for those who stood for it. And this nurse is part of that stand." Jacob spoke next. Told the board that my actions had not only saved John, but had exposed a flaw in intake procedures that, had they been followed, would have led to John's death on the tile floor. That got attention. The hospital board called an emergency session. Not publicly. Not in front of the cameras. But they met. And within days I was asked to return for a hearing. Not a trial. A conversation. I walked in wearing plain scrubs. No badge. No defense attorney. Just my files, a written statement, and the quiet knowledge that I hadn't done anything wrong. The board chair, a woman named Evelyn Marks, was the first to speak. "We've reviewed your actions, Nurse Hart." "I don't regret them," I said. "I didn't ask if you did." She paused. "There are those who say the protocol exists to protect. That every breach is a slippery slope. But there are also moments," she added, "where a single choice becomes a statement." I said nothing. She looked down at her notes. "In light of testimony, documentation, and overwhelming community response," she said slowly, "your suspension is lifted. Effective immediately." A beat passed. Then another. Then she added, "We are also instituting a new intake protocol, emergency first. It prioritizes medical stabilization before administrative processing and trauma scenarios. Inspired by your actions." I didn't speak for a full breath. Then I said thank you. And that was all. John was discharged 2 weeks later. He walked out with a cane, a stitched abdomen, and a framed certificate, presented quietly by Jacob, signed by every nurse on the trauma floor. It read, "To John Raymond, because you came back and because you kept us going." A local veterans group stepped up, arranged housing, set up counseling, handled VA paperwork. John moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from the hospital. I visited him 2 days after he settled in. Brought soup. He wouldn't stop talking about the plants on his balcony. "I get sun in the afternoon," he said. "Warms the whole place." He showed me a photo of his squad, faded and creased. "That's the one you saved?" I asked. He nodded. "All of them. One didn't make it. The rest got home. That was enough." He turned to me, serious now. "You're not like most people. I'm just a nurse." He looked at me long and hard. "No," he said. "You're the reason I didn't become just a name in another file." By the end of that month, something strange began to happen. Strangers started showing up at the ER, not with emergencies but with stories. Men and women in worn jackets, some with service pins, some without, came just to shake my hand. They waited in line at the front desk, asked for me by name, thanked me quietly, and left. One man handed me a folded flag. Said it had sat on his mantle for 10 years. Said it belonged to his brother who hadn't made it home and who would have wanted someone like me in his corner. I didn't know what to say. I took the flag. I still have it. The story didn't die down. The local paper ran a follow-up piece titled, "One Nurse, One Oath." It quoted John. It quoted Jacob. It even quoted the hospital director who admitted on record that the event had revealed serious gaps in intake judgment. They didn't apologize publicly. But they didn't need to. They changed the system. Eastwood's board approved the emergency first policy unanimously. It was printed on new placards across the ER. Intake staff were retrained. Legal reviewed the changes and found nothing to stop it, only reminders of why it hadn't been done sooner. Jacob got promoted, head of patient transport. John? He started volunteering. Said he wanted to give back, the way someone gave to him. He helped at the VA, at the shelter, even at the hospital. Quiet duties, mopping floors, delivering blankets, fixing broken handles in the restroom. People started recognizing him. "You're the vet, right?" someone asked one day in the waiting room. He just smiled. "I'm John." One morning I was called to the admin wing. Didn't know why. Assumed it was another meeting about triage updates. Instead, I found the hospital board gathered around the main conference table. At the head was Evelyn Marks. Beside her stood James Carter, the councilman. He nodded at me. "We're presenting a citation," she said. "A civic commendation for service above institutional duty." They handed me a plaque. Simple wood black engraving. "To Lily Hart RN for choosing courage over compliance. For defending care when care had no name." They clapped. I didn't. I stood still. Because it wasn't mine. Not really. It belonged to John and to Jacob and to every patient who walked in without a voice and still left alive. Afterward, I stepped outside. John was waiting by the door. "Did you get the medal?" he asked. "Something like that." He leaned on his cane, nodding. "You ever think about quitting?" he asked. "More than once." "But you didn't." "No." He didn't speak for a moment. Then softly, "I think you're the first person who saw me as something other than a problem." My throat tightened. I looked at him. "You were never the problem." That week I was offered a new position. Director of Patient Advocacy. New office. New responsibilities. More bureaucracy than I liked, but a chance to change things from the inside. I accepted. But I kept my rotation in the ER. Told them I needed to stay where the work began. And in that decision I found something unexpected. Peace. For the first time in my career, I didn't feel like I was fighting upstream. I was building something. The veterans group John volunteered with started a campaign. No more turnaways. They lobbied for statewide funding for ER support grants and partnered with clinics to track underserved former service members. John became the face of it. Not because he wanted to, because people trusted him. They listened when he spoke. They saw the scar that ran from rib to navel and understood what survival cost. One night, as I closed up after a late shift, I found a folded paper tucked into my locker. No name. Just handwriting I recognized. When I came through those doors, I didn't think I'd make it out. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me back a reason to live it. If this town remembers me at all, it's because someone remembered me first. John." I folded it and placed it in my badge sleeve. Never removed it. 6 months after that night, Eastwood Memorial hosted something we'd never had before. A community health town hall. It wasn't fancy. Folding chairs. Bulletin boards with tape charts. A coffee dispenser that kept sputtering. But it was packed. Nurses. Veterans. Single parents. Caseworkers from 3 counties. A table reserved for local leaders and another for volunteers who'd helped shape the new emergency first policy. I didn't sit. I stood in the back watching. On stage, James Carter spoke first. Then Evelyn. Then Jacob, who talked about how small moments of decency could change outcomes when systems failed. Then they called me up. I didn't have a speech. I didn't need one. "I'm not a hero," I said. "I'm just someone who saw blood and moved." That was it. No applause. Just a silence that felt like agreement. Afterward, people came up with questions. About policy, about training, about how we made it work despite the budget. I told them the truth. We hadn't solved the problem. We just stopped pretending it didn't exist. In the following months, other hospitals reached out. Requests for copies of our intake forms. Emails asking about our decision matrix for non-identified patients. A rural clinic in Arkansas even asked if I'd Zoom with their intake team. I said yes. Not because I had answers. Because I knew what the questions sounded like when lives were on the line. John's health held steady. He walked slower some days. The winter was hard on his joints, but he never missed a Wednesday shift at the shelter or his Friday rounds at the VA. He told stories there, not war stories, not the kind you expect. Stories about life after, about how hard it is to ask for help, about what it feels like to be seen again after years of feeling invisible. I watched him once from the hallway as he tied a pair of donated shoes on a man's feet. Quiet. No fanfare. That, to me, was the legacy. Not what we do when cameras are rolling, but what we do when it's just two people, both scarred in different ways, choosing care over convenience. A year after the incident, the city hosted a memorial ceremony for veterans lost to homelessness and neglect. It wasn't a big production, just a list of names, some photos, a folded flag, a plaque mounted outside the shelter with the inscription, "Let no one be forgotten." John was asked to read the final name. He did. His voice cracked on the last syllable. He stood there surrounded by silence. Then he stepped back, raised a hand and pointed to me in the crowd. "She's the reason I'm not on that wall." I lowered my head. Not out of shame. Out of weight. Because I knew how easily things could have gone the other way. The hospital honored the anniversary by publishing a report, the Raymond Protocol, they called it. A guide to trauma care for unidentified veterans. It was dry, clinical, precise. But at the back, they included a short narrative. When one nurse chose to act outside procedure, a life was saved and a system was changed. They didn't mention my name. They didn't have to. The staff knew. The community knew. John knew. And that was enough. One rainy evening I got off late. It had been a rough shift. A code blue. A child with pneumonia. A family torn by a terminal diagnosis. I stepped outside, drenched and cold. John's truck idled by the curb. He leaned out the window. "Need a ride?" I nodded. The heater inside blew warm and loud. He handed me a coffee, black, no sugar. "I heard the kid pulled through," he said. "Barely. You ever think about quitting?" he asked again. "Some days. But not today. Not today." He smiled, stared ahead at the rain-slick road. "You know what you did that night?" he asked. I stopped the bleeding. He shook his head. "You reminded me I still mattered." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't. Some truths don't need an echo. Sometimes in the early hours before my shift starts, I walk past the trauma doors. They've been repainted since that night. New hinges. New signage. But the weight of that space hasn't changed. I pause there often. Not to relive it, but to remember what it taught me. That courage isn't loud. It doesn't always come with a uniform or medal. Sometimes it looks like gloves pulled on fast or a hand pressed to a wound before anyone else moves. Sometimes it's just saying he needs help and not backing down. John Raymond still visits. He always knocks twice on the glass by the nurse's station. Brings donuts when he can, stories when he can't. New nurses know him now, not as the man who collapsed on the tile, but as the one who teaches them what the oath really means. He says I saved his life. But the truth is, he saved mine too. Because I was starting to believe that the rules mattered more than the people. That the forms and boxes and authorizations were a wall I couldn't climb. He reminded me that the wall wasn't real. And if it was, it needed tearing down. I keep his thank you note in my badge sleeve still. I read it on hard days. Because in a world that keeps adding locks to doors, sometimes all it takes is one pair of steady hands to push through. John Raymond had been turned away more times than he could count. But not that night. Not in my ER. Not while I was breathing. My name is Lily Hart. And I remember my oath. Every time I put on these scrubs.